What if I told you that a Roman legion didn't die in battle, but kept marching? Not into history, into legend. Thousands of miles east, past the edge of every map the Romans ever drew, into the heart of an empire they had never even heard of, ancient China. In 53 BCE, on a dusty plain near a town called Carrhae, Rome suffered one of the worst military disasters in its history. Tens of thousands of soldiers died. Thousands more were captured. And then, they disappeared. No records, no graves, no homecoming. For 2,000 years, historians assumed they simply vanished into the sands of the Parthian Empire and were forgotten. But 17 years later, on the other side of the known world, Chinese chroniclers wrote down something strange. A foreign unit of mercenary soldiers, fighting in a tight, square formation no one in Asia had ever seen before. A formation the Chinese called fish scale. Today, in a remote village in Gansu province, there are people with green eyes, light hair, and aquiline noses who have spent generations believing they are the descendants of Roman legionaries. Is it true? Did the eagles of Rome really march into the land of the dragon? Let's trace the ghost footprints, from the blood-stained plains of Parthia to a forgotten village at the edge of the Silk Road. To understand this mystery, we have to go back to the beginning, to the man whose ambitions started it all, Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus was the richest man in Rome, politically powerful, endlessly wealthy. But he had one thing he didn't have: military glory. While his rivals, Caesar and Pompey, were carving their names into history on the battlefield, Crassus wanted his own legend. So in 53 BCE, he convinced the Senate to let him lead 42,000 men against Parthia, the great rival empire to Rome's east, controlling modern-day Iran and Iraq. It should have been a campaign for the history books. Instead, it became a warning. At Carrhae, Crassus marched his legions into open desert, flat, exposed, with almost no water. The Parthian general, Serena, had something Rome had never truly faced before: thousands of horse archers and heavily armored cataphract cavalry. The Romans formed their famous square formations. They held their discipline, and it didn't matter. Wave after wave of arrows fell from the sky. The Parthians simply rode circles around the legions, never engaging in close combat, just wearing them down. Hour after hour, arrow after arrow. By the end of the battle, Crassus himself was dead, according to legend, killed in a brutal and almost theatrical execution. 20,000 Romans lay dead in the sand, and 10,000 more were taken prisoner. This is where official Roman history simply stops talking about them. What happened to 10,000 trained elite Roman soldiers? Rome never paid a ransom. Rome never launched a rescue. As far as the historical record is concerned, they ceased to exist. But that's not quite true, because somewhere in the years that followed, they kept moving. Ancient sources suggest the Parthians didn't execute their Roman prisoners. They did something far more practical. They resettled them on the empire's distant eastern frontier, near a city called Merv, in what is now Turkmenistan. Far from Rome, far from rescue, far from any hope of return. For these men, there was no going home, ever. So what does a soldier do when his old world is closed off to him forever? He survives. He adapts. He fights for whoever pays him. This is the theory proposed by American historian Homer Dubs in his influential and controversial book, a Roman city in China. Dubs argued that survivors of Carrhae eventually moved to the eastern edge of the Parthian Empire, before ultimately finding their way into conflict with Chinese forces. 17 years after Carrhae. The year is 36 BCE. On the far western frontier of the Han Dynasty, a Chinese general named Chen Tang is leading a campaign against a renegade Xiongnu chieftain, a warlord named Zhiji, who had set up his own fortress kingdom on the steppe, far beyond the reach of the Han court. And here is where the story gets strange. Chinese chronicles record that mercenary soldiers were fighting alongside the Huns, using a formation the texts describe as a fish scale arrangement. A wall of interlocking shields, a formation the Romans called the testudo, the tortoise. Picture it. Han Dynasty archers, among the most disciplined and skilled in the ancient world, encountering something they had never trained against. Not loose skirmishers, not cavalry, a solid, moving wall of overlapping shields advancing in lockstep, utterly unfamiliar on an Asian battlefield. The Chinese were impressed enough to write it down. Impressed enough, according to the legend, to do something even more remarkable. They didn't just defeat these soldiers, they recruited them. According to Dubs's theory, the Han Dynasty was so taken with the discipline and tactics of these foreign captives that they offered them a permanent place, inside the empire itself. A settlement was established in what is now Gansu province, and it was given a name, Liqian. Here's where it gets even stranger. Some historians have pointed out that the pronunciation of Liqian in ancient Chinese bears a striking resemblance to the word legion. A coincidence? Maybe. But the Chinese had a habit of naming frontier settlements after the people who lived there, and the evidence doesn't stop at a name. Archaeological surveys of the region have noted construction methods rarely seen elsewhere in ancient China, including the use of tree trunk counterweight devices and earthworks reinforced in a square fortification style, a design philosophy far more common around the Mediterranean than on the Asian steppe. And then there's the village itself. Even today, for generations, residents of this remote corner of Gansu have told their children a story passed down through their families, that their ancestors weren't from China at all, that they came from far away, from the West, soldiers who never went home, who built a life here instead. Locals have pointed to unusual physical features as proof: light-colored hair, blue or green eyes, and prominent hooked noses. Features that stand out generation after generation in a population otherwise indistinguishable from their Han Chinese neighbors. Some villagers have even spoken of a deep, almost ceremonial reverence for bulls, an animal associated with certain Roman military traditions, but with no obvious roots in local Chinese culture. For decades, this was treated as folklore, a charming local legend, nothing more. Then came the 21st century, and science decided to ask the question directly. In 2005, researchers collected blood samples from more than 90 residents of Liqian's surrounding villages. The results made headlines around the world. The tests revealed that some villagers carried DNA markers showing as much as 56% what researchers classified as Caucasian ancestry. For a moment, it seemed like the legend had been proven. 2,000 years of oral tradition suddenly backed by hard genetic evidence. But science is rarely that simple. And the story doesn't end there. Because Liqian wasn't just any village. It sat directly along the Silk Road, the greatest trade corridor in the ancient world, a route that carried merchants, travelers, and migrants between East and West for over 1,000 years. Critics of the Roman theory pointed out something crucial. Centuries of intermarriage along that trade route could easily explain Western genetic markers, without a single Roman soldier ever setting foot in the region. Later, more rigorous DNA studies reached a very different conclusion, finding that the local population was genetically consistent with the broader Han Chinese population, offering little support for a direct Roman bloodline. Chinese researchers were even more direct. As Professor Yang Gongla of Beijing Normal University put it, the foreign genetic markers found in Yongchang's villagers don't necessarily mean Roman ancestry at all, pointing instead to centuries of mixing along one of history's busiest crossroads. And there's one more inconvenient detail that skeptics love to point out. To this day, archaeologists have found no Roman artifacts, no Roman inscriptions, no definitive physical proof of a Roman presence anywhere near Liqian. No coins, no weapons, no tombstones with Latin names. Just a name that sounds a little bit like Legion, a formation that sounds a little bit like the Testudo, and a handful of green eyes in a sea of brown. Is that enough to rewrite 2,000 years of history? Here's the uncomfortable truth historians have to sit with. The absence of proof isn't proof of absence, and the presence of a good story isn't proof either. So why does this legend still capture imaginations, decade after decade, documentary after documentary? Maybe because it represents something we desperately want to be true. That two of the greatest civilizations in human history, separated by an entire continent of mountains, deserts, and unmapped wilderness, somehow, briefly, brushed against each other. That a defeated soldier, stripped of his homeland, his legion, his name in the official records of Rome, found a way to survive anyway. Found a new home at the far edge of the world, started a family, left descendants who, 2,000 years later, would still be telling his story. We may never have definitive proof. As one researcher put it, DNA rarely speaks in such neat, cinematic lines. It tends to whisper rather than shout. But somewhere between the bloodied sands of Carrhae and the dusty roads of Gansu, something happened. Something that left a mark, in a name, in a formation, in a story a village still tells about itself. Maybe the lost legion of Carrhae never reached China at all. Maybe it's nothing more than a beautiful coincidence, a trick of language, a trick of trade routes, a trick of the very human desire to belong to something bigger than ourselves. Or maybe, somewhere along the Silk Road, a handful of broken, homeless soldiers carrying nothing but their shields and their discipline built a new life in a land that had no name for where they came from. If that's true, then the Eagle of Rome didn't fall in the desert of Parthia. It just kept marching, quietly, for 2,000 years, through the blood of every generation that came after. So I'll leave you with this question. How many other empires, how many other peoples brushed against each other in the ancient world and left behind nothing but a whisper, waiting 2,000 years for someone to listen?